I met with Peter Chand at the Scottish Storytelling Centre to discuss his career, how he got into it, and of course, favourite childhood tales.
Well, my favourite story as a child was probably a story that my dad used to tell us when we were kids. And it's like things never change, doesn't matter how long sort of life progresses. Kids still have their favourite stories, and even though they know the beginning, the middle and the end, they still say, can we have it again and again? My kids used to do the same as well. It was a story from India, and it's quite a cheeky story that I don't tell in schools now. And when I do, it's edited. But basically, it's about a child, and it's about a lazy king, and it's about something disgusting on his finger, so you can guess the rest of it. But we loved it because it had a really good message at the end as well, and we used to ask for it again and again and again.
Peter has been a professional storyteller for over 15 years. Here's how it all began.
Well, when I was a kid, I was always sort of into writing, and I was always into poetry and things like that. And I think coming from a sort of being a child of immigrant parents where English was my second language, so I learnt Punjabi first, and then at home, and then when I went to school we started learning English, obviously, with the rest of the kids. And I think I've got a theory that sort of if you speak English as a second language as a child, I think then you're hungry for that language, if that makes sense, and you start discovering something new because it's not the language that you're familiar with at home. And so as a result, what happens is every word is... I remember being fascinated by words and repeating new words. I remember once, when I was about 6, 7 years old, and I heard the word bewildered. I still love that word, bewildered. And then for the next sort of 3, 4 weeks, every single story I was writing in school, or every single sort of bit of examination piece, had the word bewildered in it, because I just loved using it, because it was a new word. It was like finding a new toy. So I always liked stories. I always liked sort of making up stories and hearing stories as well. But it was actually a storytelling club that I was taken to some years ago by a friend, and I never even knew these things existed. And nobody was getting paid. It was an old 16th century pub in Much Wenlock in Shropshire. And people were just telling stories because they loved telling stories. And I sat there and I was just blown away, seriously. I was there from Wolverhampton, from the city. I never thought I would ever connect with a place like that and with stories in such a way. But by the time it got to me, I was my head was so full of all these stories and all these characters and legends from Wales, Scotland, from Africa, from, all over the place, that I think I put 2 small one-liners together and just made like a 3-minute story because I just wanted to feel part of it. And that's something that people forget, and you tend to forget if you've been doing it for a long time, is that 9 out of 10 times when you tell a story, you get a story back. And that's the thing. People think that when you're telling, all you're doing is speaking, but you're not. It's just as important to hear, because the stories that you tell, you don't know what's going to spring back from it. You don't know what somebody's going to say, oh, that reminds... And this has happened so many times. Any storyteller who's on the road will tell you this. Where you'll tell a story and then somebody will come up and they'll say, that reminds me of this, or I used to hear this story when I was a kid, or my father used to tell me this story, or my mother used to tell me this story, or we had a character like that, or that person, or my uncle or my auntie is just like that character in the story. So it becomes a two-way thing. And that's why storytelling is brilliant, because it's not in my opinion, it's not a passive art form. It's not an art form where you sit there like theatre and you clap at the end of it and every performance is exactly the same. It alters on day by day, depending on how you're feeling, depending on your audience, and depending on what kind of day you had, to be honest with you. So it's that's what got me involved in storytelling, seeing other people doing it and just the enjoyment they were getting from doing it and sharing it, and what it did to the listener is vitally important, is really important.